It's that time again. It's time for the monthly Q&A where I answer questions sent in by you, the viewer, all about model railroading. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, my name is Jimmy. I'm drinking some Green Mountain coffee today, and this is Coffee and Trains. This video is brought to you with support from Model Train Media. Social media is a great place to find tips, tricks, and community for model railroading. But you have to put up with all that other stuff, the politics, the crazies, and of course the AI slop. Model Train Media is here to solve that problem. It is a social media network just for model railroading. You can create a profile, share photos, start groups, participate in forums, all sorts of stuff, all without the baggage of other platforms. You can even join my group, the DIY and Digital Model Railroad Club. I have a link to Model Train Media and my group in the description below. Check them out at modeltrainmedia.com and become part of the fastest growing internet train community. If you want to tell me what kind of coffee you are drinking and be featured just like these guys right here, you can do that in the comments below, and who knows, you might see your name pop up on an episode of Coffee and Trains. Also, this is the monthly Q&A, and I will tell you how to get your questions answered at the end of this video. Cheers, guys. Trains in Motion ask, how do Kato power routing turnouts work? Well, it's actually fairly simple. So the frog is actually electrically isolated at the divergence end. So what you basically have is you have the two outer rails of the turnout are always energized, and the middle mechanism and frog are energized based on which rail they are touching. And they have that little insulator spot just past the frog so that that power doesn't go past it. So what you have basically is whichever rail is energized, is touching the mechanism, is going to energize the center mechanism and turnout. And whenever you flip that, it changes which one it is connected to. So that's the basics of how it works. It's slightly more complicated when you open it up and look at it with a little bit of wiring. It's not crazy complicated, but that's the basics of how it works. Whichever one it is aligned to, it's going to take that power and run it through. Also, the quick note, the two main Kato turnouts there are the number 6 and the number 4s. Number 6s cannot be changed from power routing, but number 4s can be changed to non-power routing. Zero to Steve asks, has anyone ever built a layout in a large mechanics toolbox? We're talking a big one that's about 50 to 70 inches long. And he says with a 22 to 30 inch wide deck. And that is something that theoretically you could build a decent in-scale layout. The hollow core door layouts are usually about 30 inches wide. 22 is getting a little bit tight. You're talking about probably getting into if you're looking at the radii, maybe like 9 3/4 inch radii track, which is going to eliminate some engines for you, but you could definitely do a loop with in-scale or an HO scale switching layout. It just really depends on that, but I thought it would just be fun to try to see what AI could come up with this. So I prompted AI to come up with an image just to see what it would look like. And here you go. Tia Edge asked, what do I think of the Impossible couplers compared to Microtrains couplers? So I have not yet personally tested out the Impossible coupler. I love the idea of it. I love that N-Scale is getting scale couplers right now. Microtrains works really, really well. So I think it's going to be hard to dethrone that. And I can see some potential issues just because of physics, but I'm going to hold all of my opinions until I actually try it. Jerry Dodds asked if a Western or cowboy theme would be a good idea for a small layout. Absolutely. If you can find the stuff to run with it, 100% it would be a good idea for a small layout. You can have a lot of fun of that. Trains are such a quintessential part of the Old West mythology that most people in the US have grown up with in one form or another. And you can find models of the engines from that era. I would actually probably look a little bit more towards maybe a narrow gauge versus standard gauge. And I would definitely look more towards a scale with a wider variety like HO scale. Even I don't think N scale is going to have that much from that era. So you're probably going to be limited to HO scale, maybe ON30 or another narrow gauge. But yeah, that's what you're going to be looking at. I'm tired, guys. I need more coffee. Durbinator 94 asks, what are some of my go-to train shows that I try to hit every year? Well, the technically 4 that I try to hit every year is I try to hit both of the Asheville, North Carolina train shows, then the Hickory, North Carolina train show, and the train show at the North Carolina Transportation Museum. I'm going to probably widen out into some South Carolina shows this year. But those are usually the easiest for me to get to. I do have a family and a full-time job, so I don't get to travel much for them. I am going to try and go to the NMRA show in Chattanooga this year. That is driving distance for me. So I'm going to try for that. And I do want to get to Amherst at some point, but that is a flight for me. And the flights for me are not that cheap. And it's always risky in wintertime in the Northeast. So but the main ones I get to are those 4 shows, and then going to add in some South Carolina shows too. The Dougler25 asks if there are any leads on an N-scale locomotive builder and like to get into N, but can't get his favorite locomotive. So what I would do is probably look into hiring someone that can build it. You can find trucks that you can do. The real problem you're going to find is, or if you're looking for just like you said, you're looking for an SD60F, you're going to be able to find a lot of SD60 chassis. And if you can just find a shell, someone to make a shell for you, that's what you could do to build the locomotive. And that's something you just have to find the right 3D modeler and then do a 3D printing service maybe. But I don't think you can find it maybe as that, but that may be something you do. You said you can only find it as a resin kit, but that may be the way to go, is to buy another SD60. I know Atlas has made the SD60 and the SD60E, so yeah. Nicholas Filippelli, 4700, says that he has a large fleet and he's going from DC to DCC, and he has some older engines that are from the 90s and things like that, talking about like E9s, F3s, F7s, something like that. He says late 90s to early 2000s. So he wants to know about converting them versus leaving them as is. So it really depends on what they are. Right now, I'm actually converting a 90s Athearn Blue Box engine, and I'm running into some issues, but I really think they're more of lubrication issues. I think I've figured out what the main things are, but I'm also having some weird power issues. So some of the motors in older locomotives drew more power than they do now, and that can be more than what the decoder can handle. So you may have a power issue there. So it really depends on what you want to go through. You may have to swap out and put newer motors that are more efficient in there to be able to run DCC. It's always something to consider. That's usually an issue for like 80s to early 90s locomotives, but it could be an issue in those 90s, those late 90s locomotives to early 2000s. It really just depends. A lot of locomotives older locomotives, you can't just swap out DCC. You have to take that into consideration. But you also talked about making a DC loop. That's something that you could do for this. It really just depends on what you want to put it through and how many you have that are not DCC ready versus how many you have that are DCC ready. 88-bit Cube 50 wants to ask about custom N-scale figures, and can anyone do that? Maybe people from the 1950s and the 1960s. And that is something that is definitely in the 3D printing realm. So I would look around on Etsy and eBay, and then maybe also ask on some forums, whether it's Facebook groups or other model railroad forums. He also asks, as I do N-scale, what would be a fair budget for a layout that is 4x8 with 4 engines? Well, it really depends on a few factors. First of all, if you're doing DCC, you can probably just add an extra $100 per engine, $80 to $100 depending on what you're buying. Atlas, you can get good DCC for under $200 an engine, but if you're looking at something like Scale Trains, Broadway Limited, you're going to be looking at $200 to $300 per engine. Yeah, I would say if you budget $200 an engine for DCC, about $125 for DC engines, so you're looking at anywhere from $500 to $800 for engines. So let's just make this easy. Let's say I do $800 for engines if I'm doing 4 engines that are DCC, and I want to start off with 10 pieces of rolling stock. Don't want to go crazy just yet, and I can slow roll this. So we'll say $30, so that's $300, that's $1,100. And let's just make it a nice even number and say probably you're looking at, usually when I budget for a layout, it's probably, I'll do $500 400 to 500 for the track. You could probably do 300 to 500 depending on how much track you're going to put. If you're just doing a loop, it's going to be really cheap. But if you're starting putting turnouts and things like that, and all sorts of different things to a crazy track plan, you would do that. But I think you could probably start by saying like a number that'll get you going with a good, decent layout would be between $2,000 and $2,500 for the whole thing. You could get started and be decent there if you did a little bit of frugal and smart spending in certain places. But the thing I want to emphasize with this is that you can slow roll this and just do the money when you can. You don't have to immediately go, here's $2,000. I know I've put more than that into this layout here, but I did it slowly. I recycled track from a previous layout. I've had the most of the engines in rolling stock for years. So while the value that I have here is probably quite expensive, I didn't spend that all at once. So basically, slow roll your layout. I think $2,000 to $2,500 would get you started and get you in a good place. And then you can really see what else you want to spend and how you want to do that. I think that's a good starting place. It really depends on how much track and how much rolling stock and whether or not you're DCC. O Captain says they're looking to get into modeling with their tax refund this year, and they're a bit overwhelmed about how stuff has changed since they were a kid in the 80s. I totally get that. The model railroad market has exploded in quantity and quality. And you're looking to model a branch line which services a mill and refinery. Are there good resources seeing what types of locomotives are used and the size of trains they use? So what I would do is figure out an area that you want to stylize your layout after and see if there are any railroads around there that serviced those types of industries. Then you can see what railroads ran there and things like that, and start looking at like rail pictures online. There's a lot of rail fanning photos. That's what I would do. I don't think there's a specific, I think Europe or the UK or someone they have like specific eras where the North American one is more blended because of the way our locomotives are. I mean, you can still find locomotives from, mid-century diesels running today that have been updated. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And I think I also this was written before this, but you also ask about how do I have a DCC, get started in DCC video. I have my setup video that I did last week, I believe. So that's a video that you can check out. But overall, just research an area and figure out what kind of railroads there are. There's no like single resource for that, but basically just figure out where you want to go and what era, and then figure out, like, look at the railroads that ran in the area and see how they did it. You can find a lot of rail fanning photos that way. Sean Nolan asks, is flex track or set track more cost effective? So flex track is, if you're looking for pure length and how much track you get, flex track is more cost effective because you can get a piece that's like 3 feet long, and you can do that. Overall, it's a little bit more of a learning curve to work with it. You got to worry about cutting it and doing ties and getting the right measurements, plus not doing an incorrect radius and things like that. But for used flex track, a lot of places you can find, if you have a hobby shop that sells old used stuff, a lot of times you can find it there. Sometimes you can find it at train shows. I would just avoid any sort of brass or steel flex track. Try to get nickel silver. Battleship Orion asks, what is a good ballpark for a temporary switching layout? So what I would say for a temporary switching layout, I have seen, there was actually an article in Model Railroader where they did a $500 switching layout. So I'd say between probably low end 300 to 400, high end 1,000 to do a temporary switching layout, depending on how big you want it to be. You also asked another question about, with access to geology and historical maps becoming easier, why do layouts seem like they are prioritizing the trains first? Well, this is actually something that I think is really, really interesting. Now, I can't really do it too much. I'm going to be able to do it on my upper level, but with T-Track. But one of the simplest things I've seen that can solve that is that even on your like eye level, like your main level track, like try to have areas that dip below the track, and that can add some realism to it. And also, one of the things that I like to do, and I did this on my last layout, was make it look like they had to have something done to get the train through. Like I had a mountain that looked like they had to blast through it to get the train through. So make it look like that, having like a hill stop briefly right there, just with just enough space for the train to get through, or maybe even worn down a little bit, is going to make it look realistic. Brutus44269 asks, could I explain how DCC decoders work? Well, I can actually explain how DCC works. I've done that in an entire video, and I will link that right up here, as well as in the description below and at the end of this video, so that you do not miss it. But the basics of it are that the DCC base station is going to take the inputs from your controller and encode them and send them via an electrical signal up through the track into the engine, and that electrical signal is then decoded by the decoder, hence the name decoder, to see what commands it needs to give out and what it needs to operate. So when it gets that encoded message and decodes it, and it says, hey, I need to set the motor to this power, I need to turn on this light, I need to activate this sound, that's basically what it's doing. And the track gets a constant amount of voltage versus DC where you're varying the voltage, so it can always just pull power from that to run the accessories or the motor or anything like that. Cody's Trains asks, would cell phone speakers used for Arduino projects also work for model trains in scale? And they have an idea of how loud they are on their phone, but how would they perform under an 8 ohm, 1 watt load from a decoder? That is a good question. You would have to look at the speaker itself and see if it can do it. I already know that Soundtrax has some really small sugar cube speakers. I've never actually looked at what the cell phone speaker would look like, but it really depends on the size of it. But it could potentially be something. It really just depends on also what the drivers can do to really like pump out the sound, because you can have the best speaker in the world, but if you don't have good power behind it, it's not going to be great. If you have a question that you want answered on next month's Q&A, you can put it in the comments below and I will get to them. I do have to put these together after about a week, so get these in as fast as possible. You can just write them down in the comments below, and I try to take the first 10 to 15 depending on how much time I have to do a video. But yeah, I love answering your questions. I wish I could answer them all at once, but that would just be an insanely long video. So thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, drink some coffee, and happy railroading.